The morning sun streamed through the curtains of Eleanor Washington's modest apartment, casting a warm glow on the framed photos that lined her bookshelf. At 78, she had collected a lifetime of memories: her wedding day, her 30 years teaching at the local high school, her children's graduations, and precious moments with her late husband, Harold. Today marked 3 months since Harold had passed away, leaving Eleanor to navigate life alone for the first time in over 50 years. Eleanor stood before her mirror, carefully pinning her silver hair into a neat bun. Her hands weren't as steady as they once were, but she took pride in her appearance. She chose her best Sunday dress, a deep purple with tiny white flowers, and the pearl earrings Harold had given her on their 40th anniversary. Today was important. She needed to deposit Harold's final pension check and sort out some issues with the joint account they had shared. "You can do this, Eleanor," she whispered to herself, practicing the smile she would wear despite the ache in her heart. Since Harold's passing, even simple tasks had become mountains to climb, especially when they involved paperwork and financial matters Harold had usually handled. Eleanor gathered her handbag, checkbook, reading glasses, and the documents she had organized the night before. She tucked Harold's folded check carefully into her wallet. The amount wasn't large, but it would help with next month's rent. Living on a fixed income had become increasingly difficult with rising prices, but Eleanor was determined to maintain her independence. Before leaving, she glanced at Harold's photo on the bedside table. "Wish me luck today," she said softly. "I'm still learning how to do all this without you." The walk to the bus stop was slow, but manageable with her cane. Eleanor had always preferred walking, but lately her arthritis made even short distances challenging. The neighborhood had changed over the 50 years she had lived there. Some changes were good. The new community garden where she volunteered twice a week, teaching young children about plants just as she had once taught them mathematics. Other changes were harder. Friends who had moved away or passed on, businesses closed, and new buildings that made the area almost unrecognizable. On the bus, a young woman immediately stood and offered her seat. Eleanor thanked her with genuine warmth. These small kindnesses kept her faith in humanity strong, despite the occasional rudeness she encountered. The bus ride downtown took nearly 30 minutes, giving Eleanor time to rehearse what she would say at the bank. She had written down her questions and concerns in her neat teacher's handwriting, wanting to appear organized and competent. First National Bank stood imposing on Main Street, its glass and stone facade gleaming in the late morning light. Eleanor had been banking there for decades, back when Mr. Thompson was manager, and knew every customer by name. Now it was all computers and young people who typed rapidly and spoke in financial terms she sometimes struggled to understand. Eleanor took a deep breath before climbing the steps to the entrance. A security guard held the door for her, nodding respectfully. Inside, the bank was busier than she had expected for a Tuesday morning. The line for the tellers stretched nearly to the door, and almost all the chairs in the waiting area were occupied. Eleanor approached the check-in desk, where a young woman was tapping at a computer. "Good morning," Eleanor said. "I need to deposit a check and discuss some matters with someone about my account." The young woman barely looked up. "Take a number and wait in line for the next available teller," she said, pushing a small paper ticket toward Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her number 43. The digital display above the teller windows showed they were currently serving number 27. This would be a long wait. Finding an empty chair seemed impossible until an older gentleman noticed her standing with her cane and offered his seat. "I'm almost done here anyway," he said kindly. Eleanor thanked him and settled in for the wait, placing her handbag carefully on her lap. The bank's atmosphere was far from peaceful. Phones rang constantly, conversations overlapped, and occasional announcements blared over the speaker system. Eleanor observed the other customers, young professionals checking their watches impatiently, parents trying to quiet restless children, elderly folks like herself clutching paperwork with concerned expressions. Nearly 45 minutes passed before the display showed number 42. Eleanor gathered her things, standing slowly to ease the stiffness in her joints. She had spent the hour waiting time watching the tellers, trying to gauge which one might be most helpful. There were 4 windows open. The woman at window 1 seemed harried and abrupt with customers. The man at window 2 kept his head down, barely making eye contact. The teller at window 3 smiled often and took time with each person. Window 4 had the youngest teller, a man who appeared efficient but somewhat impatient. When number 43 flashed on the screen, window 4 lit up. Eleanor made her way carefully to the counter where the young man, his name tag read Brandon, was already looking past her to assess the remaining line. "Good morning," Eleanor said cheerfully, setting her handbag on the counter. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Brandon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he hoped whatever she needed would be quick. "I need to deposit this check, please," Eleanor said, carefully removing Harold's pension check from her wallet. "And I have some questions about my account." As she handed over the check, Eleanor noticed Brandon's subtle sigh. She fumbled slightly with her reading glasses, feeling a sudden nervousness under his impatient gaze. "I'll need your ID and account." "Number?" Brandon said, his voice louder than necessary. Eleanor nodded, opening her handbag to find her driver's license. "I don't drive anymore," she explained as she handed it over. "But I keep it updated for identification." Brandon barely glanced at the license before typing information into his computer. "The account number?" he prompted when Eleanor didn't immediately provide it. "Oh, yes." Eleanor pulled out her checkbook, carefully reading the numbers at the bottom of her check. "It's a joint account with my late husband," she added. "Harold Washington. He passed 3 months ago." Something in Brandon's expression softened momentarily. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, though the words sounded rehearsed. "Have you filed the death certificate with the bank?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, I came in right after. A very nice lady helped me. She said everything was taken care of, but I've been receiving some confusing statements." She reached into her handbag again, pulling out an envelope. "See, this shows a service charge I don't understand. We've never had this charge before." Brandon glanced at the statement. "That's a monthly maintenance fee. Your account type requires a minimum balance of $1,500 to waive the fee." "But we've had this account for over 30 years, Eleanor explained. "We've never paid this fee before." "Your account status probably changed when your husband's direct deposit stopped coming in," Brandon said, typing rapidly. "The balance has fallen below the minimum requirement." Eleanor felt a wave of concern. Her fixed income was carefully budgeted and unexpected fees were troubling. "Is there a different type of account that wouldn't have these fees? For seniors, perhaps?" Brandon barely looked up from his screen. "There's a senior checking account, but it still has a minimum balance requirement of $1,000. Eleanor did some quick mental math. With the rent due next week and the rising cost of her medications, maintaining that kind of balance would be difficult. "I see," she said quietly. "And how much is the monthly fee?" $15, Brandon replied. "It's all in the account, disclosure you received." Eleanor couldn't remember receiving any disclosure. After Harold died, she had received so many documents and forms that some details had surely slipped past her. $15 might not seem like much to some, but to Eleanor it was a meaningful amount. Almost a week's worth of groceries. As she considered her options, Eleanor noticed people lining up behind her. She felt the pressure of their impatience, coupled with Brandon's frequent glances at the growing line. This wasn't how banking used to be. She remembered when tellers would take time with each customer, offering coffee in the waiting area, asking about family members by name. "Let me deposit this check first," Eleanor decided, "and then perhaps I could speak with someone about changing my account type." Brandon nodded, processing the deposit with quick efficiency. "The funds will be available in 3 business days," he informed her. "As for changing your account, you'll need to speak with a personal banker. They can explain your options." Eleanor looked around the busy bank, uncertain where to go next. "Is there someone available now?" Brandon pointed to another desk where 2 bank employees were engaged with customers. "You'll need to take another number for the personal bankers. The wait is about an hour right now." An hour more of waiting seemed daunting after already standing so long. Eleanor's back was beginning to ache and she hadn't brought her pain medication. Still, She needed to resolve this issue before the next fee hit her account. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her disappointment. "Thank you for your help." As she gathered her belongings, Brandon had already called next customer and was looking past her. Eleanor moved slowly away from the counter, feeling strangely invisible despite her bright purple dress. Banking had become just one more thing that made her feel out of place in a world that seemed to move too quickly for people like her. Eleanor approached the desk to get another number for the personal bankers. The weight of the day's tasks, which had seemed manageable this morning, now felt overwhelming. But as her former students would attest, Mrs. Washington had never been one to give up easily, no matter how difficult the problem before her. Eleanor took the small paper ticket from the machine, number 16, and looked up at the digital display that showed they were currently serving number 4. Her heart sank a little. Another long wait stretched ahead of her, and her feet were already aching from standing in line earlier. She scanned the waiting area for an empty seat, spotting one between a mother with a fussy toddler and a businessman engrossed in his phone. Eleanor made her way over carefully, lowering herself onto the hard plastic chair with a soft grunt. She arranged her handbag and papers neatly on her lap, settling in for what would likely be at least another hour. The bank's atmosphere had grown even more hectic since she'd arrived. The lunch hour was approaching, and more customers streamed through the doors every minute. The noise level rose steadily, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, children whining, people discussing financial matters in hushed but urgent tones. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, wishing she had remembered to bring her small bottle of water. Her throat felt dry after explaining her situation to Brandon, the impatient teller. The mother beside her was trying to keep her toddler entertained with keys and crumpled receipts. The little boy, around 2 years old with curly brown hair and bright eyes, dropped a toy car that rolled toward Eleanor's feet. She leaned forward with some effort, retrieving it and holding it out to the child with a warm smile. "Thank you," the harried mother said, looking grateful for the small kindness. "He can't sit still for more than 2 minutes." "My grandson was just the same at that age," Eleanor replied, remembering how her daughter's oldest boy had been a bundle of endless energy, always on the move. The woman smiled, seeming relieved to have someone understanding nearby. "I didn't expect to be here so long. They're understaffed again." Eleanor nodded. "Banking isn't what it used to be. When my husband and I opened our account here, they knew us by name. Offered coffee while we waited." "That sounds nice," the woman said, bouncing her fussing child on her knee. "Today I'd settle for them just having all their teller windows open." Their conversation faded as the woman's attention returned to her increasingly restless child. Eleanor opened her handbag and took out the bank statements she'd brought, studying them again. The maintenance fee that Brandon had mentioned appeared on the last 3 statements, $45 total that she couldn't afford to lose. Eleanor had always been careful with money, even when times weren't so tight. After a lifetime of modest living on teachers' salaries, she and Harold had managed to save enough for a comfortable retirement, but medical bills from Harold's final illness had depleted much of their savings. Numbers 5, then 6, then 7 appeared on the digital display. The wait dragged on. Eleanor watched people come and go, observing the different ways the bank staff treated various customers. The well-dressed ones seemed to receive more attentive service, their questions answered with patience and detail. Others, particularly the elderly or those who appeared to have less money, were often rushed through their transactions. By number 10, Eleanor's back was protesting the hard chair. She shifted position, trying to find relief without much success. The mother and toddler had been called to a personal banker's desk, replaced by an older gentleman who immediately pulled out a newspaper, creating a wall between himself and the rest of the waiting area. Eleanor's mind wandered to Harold. He had always handled their banking matters, his meticulous nature perfect for keeping track of accounts and payments. When they'd visit the bank together, he'd wear his navy blazer and speak with confident knowledge about interest rates and account types. The bank employees had respected him, perhaps because of his commanding presence despite his average height, or perhaps because he never accepted being treated as anything less than a valued customer. "What would you do now, Harold?" she whispered to herself, glancing down at her wedding ring. The simple gold band had grown loose on her finger over the years, but she couldn't bear to remove it. By the time number 15 flashed on the screen, Eleanor had been in the bank for nearly 2 hours. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she'd planned to have lunch at the small cafe across the street after finishing her banking. That seemed increasingly unlikely now, as the whole morning had slipped away in this sterile, noisy place. "Number 16, please approach desk 3, the automated voice announced. Eleanor gathered her things, rising slowly from the chair. Her joints protested after sitting so long, and she leaned heavily on her cane as she made her way to the indicated desk. The personal banker was a woman in her 30s with straight blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and sharp features that gave her a severe appearance despite her professional smile. Her nameplate read, Diane Richards. "Good afternoon," Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from Diane. "Thank you for seeing me." Diane nodded briskly. "How can I help you today?" Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to type. Eleanor carefully explained about the maintenance fees on her account since Harold's passing, how she'd never paid such fees before, and her concern about meeting minimum balance requirements on her fixed income. As she spoke, she noticed Diane's eyes occasionally darting to her computer screen or past Eleanor to other customers, suggesting her full attention wasn't on the conversation. It made Eleanor speak faster than she normally would, rushing to get all her concerns addressed before the banker's limited patience ran out. "So what I'm wondering," Eleanor concluded, "is whether there might be an account better suited to my situation now that I'm on my own." Diane clicked through several screens before responding. "The account you currently have requires a $500 minimum daily balance to avoid the monthly maintenance fee, as your teller explained. We do have a senior account available for customers over 65, but it still requires a $1,000 minimum balance." "And if I can't maintain that balance?" Eleanor asked. "My Social Security and small pension only stretch so far." "Then unfortunately you would incur the monthly fee," Diane said. "It's $12 for the senior account instead of $15 for your current account. $3 less each month wasn't much of an improvement." Eleanor sighed softly. "Is there anything without a minimum balance requirement?" "I've been a customer here for over 30 years. Diane's expression remained neutral, but her tone became slightly condescending. "We do have a basic checking account with no minimum balance, but it has limitations on transactions and a different fee structure. Given your situation, it might be difficult to manage those limitations." Eleanor bristled at the implication that she couldn't manage her own banking. "What limitations do you mean?" "The basic account allows only 4 in-person transactions per month. After that, there's a fee for each teller visit. It's really designed for customers who primarily bank online." "I see," Eleanor said quietly. She didn't own a computer and had never used online banking. Harold had always written checks or visited the bank in person. "And there's nothing else available?" Diane shook her head. "Those are our account options. I can print out the disclosure forms for each if you'd like to review them." "Yes, please," Eleanor said. "I'd like to understand all the details." As Diane went to retrieve the printouts from a nearby printer, Eleanor noticed a young bank employee watching her from across the lobby. He had been observing her interaction with apparent interest, though he quickly looked away when he caught her glance. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but Eleanor couldn't place him. Diane returned with several pages of dense text in tiny print. "These outline all our account types and associated fees," she explained, sliding them across the desk. "You'll need to decide which option works best for you." Eleanor squinted at the small print, wishing she had brought her stronger reading glasses. "Would you mind explaining the main differences again? This print is rather small." A flicker of impatience crossed Diane's face. "As I mentioned, your current account has a $1,500 minimum balance requirement with a $15 monthly fee if you fall below that. The senior account requires $1,000 with a $12 fee. The basic account has no minimum but limits your in-person transactions." She spoke louder than necessary, as if Eleanor's request for clarification indicated a hearing problem rather than difficulty reading small print. Several people at nearby desks glanced over, making Eleanor feel embarrassed and conspicuous. "I understand those differences," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady despite her discomfort. "But what about other features? Do they all offer check writing? Are there ATM fees? Overdraft protection?" Diane sighed, not bothering to hide her frustration now. "All of that information is in the disclosure documents. Perhaps you'd like to take them home and review them with a family member who can explain the details to you." The suggestion that she needed someone else to explain banking concepts to her stung. Eleanor had taught mathematics for 30 years, managed a classroom budget, and served on the school district's finance committee. She understood numbers perfectly well. What she didn't understand was why this bank, where she and Harold had been loyal customers for decades, now treated her like an inconvenience. "I'm quite capable of understanding banking terms," Eleanor said firmly. "I simply need clear information presented in a readable format." Diane's expression remained professionally pleasant, but her eyes had cooled. "Of course. Let me see if I can find our large print brochures." She rose and walked away again, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. While waiting, Eleanor noticed more people looking in her direction, including Brandon, the teller who had helped her earlier. He was leaning over to say something to another teller, both of them glancing her way. Eleanor felt increasingly uncomfortable, like an unwelcome disruption to their day rather than a valued customer. When Diane returned, she had no brochures. "I'm sorry. We're out of the large print versions. If you'd like to make a decision today about your account, I can help you complete the paperwork. Otherwise, you might want to come back another time." The dismissal was thinly veiled. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, summoning the dignity she had cultivated through decades as an educator. "I'll take these documents home to review," she said, carefully folding the papers and placing them in her handbag. "Thank you for your time." As she rose to leave, Diane was already looking past her to the next customer waiting. Eleanor moved slowly toward the exit, feeling oddly defeated. In all her years, she had never felt so diminished by a simple banking errand. Near the entrance, Eleanor paused, realizing she had forgotten to ask one important question about her account. She debated whether to take another number and wait again or to approach one of the teller windows directly. Seeing that the line had shortened considerably since the lunch hour had passed, she decided to try the teller route. Brandon was still at window 4, and his line was shortest. Eleanor joined it, leaning heavily on her cane as she waited. When she reached the window, recognition flashed across Brandon's face, followed by poorly concealed impatience. "Yes, Mrs. Washington. Was there something else?" His tone suggested he hoped there wasn't. "I forgot to ask about the check I deposited," Eleanor explained. "My rent is due next Monday. Will the funds be available by then?" Brandon tapped at his keyboard. "As I mentioned earlier, there's a 3-day hold on the check. It was deposited today, Tuesday, so the funds will be available Friday." "Yes, but what time on Friday? My rent must be paid by noon on Monday, and I need to get a money order." Brandon's sigh was audible this time. "The funds will be released first thing Friday morning. But Mrs. Washington, you really should consider setting up automatic payments for recurring bills like rent. It would be much more efficient than coming into the branch each month." The suggestion might have been helpful if delivered differently, but his tone made it sound like a criticism of her banking habits. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "My landlord only accepts money orders," she explained, though she felt no obligation to justify her financial practices to this young man. "And I prefer to keep track of my expenses by handling them personally." Brandon raised his eyebrows slightly. "Well, that's certainly your choice. But banking has changed a lot in recent years. Most people find electronic methods much more convenient." "I'm sure they do," Eleanor replied. "But not everyone has the same comfort level with technology or the same access to it. Maybe you could get a younger relative to help you set up online banking," Brandon suggested, his voice rising as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. "It's really very simple once you learn how." Several people in line behind Eleanor shifted impatiently. She could feel their stares on her back, adding to her discomfort. The conversation had moved beyond genuine customer service into something that felt uncomfortably like public humiliation. "Thank you for checking on my deposit," Eleanor said, deciding to end the interaction before it became more awkward. "I'll be back on Friday." As she turned to leave, she heard Brandon call to the next customer with notably more enthusiasm than he'd shown her. Eleanor clutched her handbag tightly, fighting the lump forming in her throat. In her younger days, she might have spoken to a manager about the treatment she'd received, but now she just wanted to leave with what dignity she had left. The bank's heavy glass doors seemed heavier than when she'd entered hours earlier. Eleanor pushed through them with effort, stepping out into the afternoon sunlight. The day had warmed considerably, and she felt overdressed in her good purple dress and stockings. The cafe across the street was packed with the lunch crowd, making her original plan for a quiet meal there seem impossible now. Instead, Eleanor headed toward the bus stop. Her shoulders slumped slightly, despite her best efforts to maintain her usual straight posture. The morning that had begun with such determined optimism had dissolved into a series of small humiliations. She thought again of Harold, how he never would have allowed anyone to speak to her that way, how his presence beside her had somehow shielded her from the indignities that seemed to come with aging alone. As Eleanor reached the bus stop bench and lowered herself gratefully onto it, she didn't notice the sleek black car pulling up to the curb in front of First National Bank, nor the distinguished-looking man who emerged from it, straightening his expensive suit as he glanced up at the bank's imposing facade. Eleanor sat on the bus stop bench feeling the weight of the morning's disappointments. She opened her purse to check the bus schedule she kept tucked inside her wallet, only to realize she had missed the 12:30 bus. The next one wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes. With a sigh, she considered her options. The thought of waiting in the growing heat didn't appeal to her, but neither did returning to the bank's air-conditioned lobby where she'd been made to feel so unwelcome. A small coffee shop caught her eye across the street. Perhaps she could wait there instead, have a cool drink, and rest her tired feet. Eleanor rose carefully and made her way to the crosswalk, waiting patiently for the pedestrian signal to change. As she waited, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the bank. Eleanor didn't pay it much attention at first. Expensive cars were common downtown. But something about the tall man who emerged from it caught her eye. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to authority, straightening his perfectly tailored suit as he climbed the bank steps. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though Eleanor couldn't place why. The pedestrian light changed, and Eleanor crossed the street, the thought of the mysterious man already fading as she focused on navigating the uneven pavement with her cane. By the time she reached the coffee shop, she had forgotten him entirely, her mind returning to the stack of account disclosures in her purse and the decisions she would need to make about her banking. Inside the coffee shop, cool air and the rich scent of fresh coffee greeted her. The place was busy but not packed, with several empty tables available. Eleanor approached the counter, studying the menu board with its bewildering array of options. Coffee had been simpler in her day, regular or decaf with or without cream, and sugar. Now there were sizes in Italian words and drinks with layers and foam and flavored syrups. "Can I help you?" asked a friendly young woman behind the counter. Her name tag read Lily, and she wore her hair in colorful braids that reminded Eleanor of one of her former students. "Just a small iced tea, please," Eleanor said, opting for simplicity. "Unsweetened if you have it." "Of course, that'll be Todo 75. Eleanor opened her coin purse, counting out exact change from the small amount of cash she carried. Lily accepted it with a smile and moved to prepare the drink while Eleanor waited at the pickup counter. "Here you go," Lily said moments later, handing over a plastic cup of amber liquid. "Would you like any help finding a seat?" The offer touched Eleanor. "No thank you, dear. I can manage. But I appreciate your asking." She chose a small table by the window where she could watch for her bus while enjoying her tea. The chair was more comfortable than the bank's had been, and Eleanor felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as she settled in. She took out the bank documents, placing them on the table beside her drink. Across the street, the bank continued its busy afternoon routine. People streamed in and out of the glass doors, some hurrying, others moving at a more leisurely pace. Eleanor watched them absently, her mind preoccupied with calculations about her finances. If she switched to the senior account, She would save $3 a month in fees, $36 a year. Not insignificant on her tight budget, but was it worth the hassle of changing accounts and potentially facing new problems? Eleanor was so lost in thought that she almost missed seeing the commotion at the bank entrance. A small crowd had gathered near the doors where the well-dressed man she had noticed earlier appeared to be speaking with some urgency to one of the security guards. Even from across the street, his commanding presence was evident. Other bank employees had joined the conversation, their body language deferential. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. Something unusual was happening. After a few minutes, the man and several bank staff disappeared inside. Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully, wondering what might have caused such a stir. In her younger days, she might have assumed it was a robbery or some other emergency, but the interaction had seemed too controlled for that. More likely some VIP customer with a complaint, she decided. Eleanor returned her attention to the account, disclosures squinting at the fine print. The documents were filled with banking jargon and complex fee structures explained in the smallest possible typeface. She wished she had brought her stronger reading glasses. After several minutes of struggling to make sense of the information, she set the papers aside with a sigh of frustration. This was exactly the kind of task Harold had handled, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he pored over the details that now overwhelmed her. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled as new customers entered. Eleanor glanced up, then quickly returned her gaze to the window, not wanting to stare. 2 bank employees she recognized from earlier, including Brandon, the unhelpful teller, had come in for their coffee break. They stood in line talking in low voices, their expressions serious. "I can't believe he just showed up like that," Eleanor overheard Brandon saying to his colleague. "No warning at all. Finch is losing his mind back there." "Who is he anyway?" the other employee asked. "Some big shot from corporate?" "Are you kidding? That's Robert Thompson. He owns half the commercial real estate downtown, sits on like 5 company boards, and donates millions to local charities. His family has banked with us forever. Finch says we have to treat him like royalty." Eleanor's ears perked up at the name. Robert Thompson. The pieces clicked into place in her mind, bringing back a flood of memories. Could it really be the same Robert Thompson who had been her student nearly 40 years ago? A bright boy from a modest background, who had gone on to college on a scholarship she had helped him secure? She remembered young Robert clearly, serious, hard-working, with an aptitude for mathematics that had impressed her. His single mother had worked 2 jobs to support him and his siblings. Eleanor had spent many after-school hours tutoring him, writing recommendation letters and encouraging him to apply to colleges that might have seemed out of reach. She had lost track of him after he graduated, as happened with so many students over the years, though she had occasionally heard his name mentioned in local news as his business success grew. If this was indeed her former student, he had clearly done very well for himself. Eleanor felt a small glow of pride at the thought, the kind that only teachers know, that special satisfaction of seeing a student exceed all expectations. The bank employees collected their drinks and left, still discussing the important visitor and the apparent commotion he had caused. Eleanor watched them return to the bank, her curiosity deepening. She checked her watch. Still 20 minutes until her bus would arrive. On impulse, she gathered her things, disposed of her empty cup, and thanked Lily as she headed for the door. "Have a wonderful day," Lily called after her. Outside, the afternoon heat hit Eleanor like a wall. She paused to adjust her hat, providing a bit more shade for her face, then made her way back to the crosswalk. She wasn't entirely sure why she felt compelled to return to the bank. Perhaps it was simple curiosity about whether this Robert Thompson was indeed her former student. Perhaps it was the unfinished business of her account situation. Or perhaps it was something else, a desire not to end her day at the bank on such a sour note. Whatever the reason, Eleanor found herself climbing the bank steps once again, moving carefully but with renewed purpose. Inside, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. The staff moved with increased alertness, straightening papers, speaking more quietly to customers, throwing occasional glances toward the back offices. Something had definitely shifted. Eleanor approached the check-in desk, where the same young Woman from earlier looked considerably more attentive now. "Good afternoon," Eleanor said. "I was here earlier about my account, but I have a few more questions. Would it be possible to speak with someone?" "Of course," the young woman replied, her tone markedly more helpful than it had been that morning. "Let me check if one of our personal bankers is available." She made a brief phone call, then smiled at Eleanor. "Patricia will be with you in just a moment. Would you like to have a seat while you wait?" "Thank you, that would be nice," Eleanor said, surprised by the improved service. She settled into one of the chairs in the waiting area, noticing that several staff members were huddled near the manager's office, speaking in hushed tones. The glass doors of the office were closed, but through them Eleanor could see several people seated around a conference table, including a man whose back was turned to her. Before she had waited even 5 minutes, a smartly dressed woman approached. "Her Mrs. Washington? I'm Patricia Hughes, one of the senior personal bankers. I understand you have some questions about your account?" Eleanor rose slowly. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me. Would you like to come to my office? We can speak privately there." Patricia gestured toward a small glass-walled room near the back of the bank floor. As they walked, Eleanor noticed Brandon at his teller window, watching them with a puzzled expression. He quickly looked away when he caught her eye. Patricia's office was neat and comfortable, with 2 plush visitor chairs rather than the hard plastic ones in the main waiting area. "Please make yourself comfortable," Patricia said, closing the door to reduce the noise from the bank floor. "Now, how can I help you today?" Eleanor explained her situation again, Harold's passing, the new account fees, her confusion about the best option for her circumstances. As she spoke, Patricia listened attentively, nodding and taking notes, a sharp contrast to the dismissive treatment she had received earlier. "Mrs. Washington, I'm very sorry for your loss," Patricia said when Eleanor had finished. "And I apologize if you received less than stellar service today. We pride ourselves on meeting the needs of all our customers, especially long-standing ones like yourself." "Thank you," Eleanor said, somewhat taken aback by the apology. "I've been banking here since 1975. Harold and I opened our first account when we bought our house." Patricia nodded, typing something into her computer. "I see that in your records. Nearly 50 years with First National. That's remarkable. Loyalty." She turned the screen slightly so Eleanor could see it. "I've looked at your account history, and I notice you've never had any overdrafts. You've maintained consistent balances, and you've been an ideal customer." "We always tried to be careful with money," Eleanor said. "Teaching doesn't make you rich, but we managed our finances responsibly." "I can see that," Patricia agreed. "Given your history with us and your current situation, I'd like to suggest a different option than what you were offered earlier. We have a legacy account type that isn't advertised much anymore, but it's perfect for long-term customers like yourself. It has no minimum balance requirement and no monthly fee." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "No fee at all? Why wasn't I told about this earlier?" Patricia had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "It's a specialty account that not all our staff are familiar with. It's generally offered at the manager's discretion for valuable long-term relationships." She leaned forward slightly. "To be completely honest, Mrs. Washington, we should have offered this to you immediately after your husband's passing. I apologize that we didn't. The sudden change in treatment was puzzling." Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what had prompted this reversal. "That sounds like exactly what I need," she said cautiously. "What's the catch?" Patricia smiled. "No catch. The account includes free checks, no ATM fees at our machines, and a dedicated customer service line if you ever have questions. It's our way of thanking you for your loyalty." She began typing again. "I can start the paperwork right now if you'd like to make the switch." "Yes, I think that would be best," Eleanor agreed, still somewhat bewildered by the turn of events. As Patricia prepared the forms, Eleanor glanced through the glass walls of the office toward the bank floor. The manager's office door had opened and several people were emerging, including the tall man in the expensive suit. He was speaking with an older man who appeared to be the bank manager, based on his deferential body language. From this distance and angle, Eleanor could see the man's face clearly for the first time. Her breath caught slightly. There was no doubt now. It was indeed Robert Thompson, her former student. Older, certainly, with silver threading his dark hair at the temples and lines of experience around his eyes. But unmistakably the same thoughtful eyes, the same square jaw. He had grown into his features well, carrying himself with the confidence of success but without the arrogance that sometimes accompanied it. As Eleanor watched, Robert seemed to be giving instructions to the manager, who nodded repeatedly. Several other bank employees hovered nearby, clearly eager to make a good impression. The scene confirmed what Brandon had said in the coffee shop. This was indeed someone of considerable importance to the bank. Mrs. Washington? Patricia's voice brought Eleanor's attention back to the matter at hand. I have the forms ready for your signature. I've also taken the liberty of crediting back the maintenance fees you were charged over the past 3 months. That's very kind, Eleanor said, accepting the pen Patricia offered. May I ask what prompted this special treatment? This morning, I couldn't even get someone to explain the account types in a font I could read. Patricia hesitated, glancing briefly toward the bank manager and Robert Thompson. Let's just say there's been some renewed focus on customer service excellence this afternoon, particularly for our most valued clients. Eleanor followed her gaze, the pieces falling into place. Something about Robert Thompson's unexpected visit had changed the atmosphere in the bank dramatically. Whether he had specifically mentioned her case or simply raised concerns about customer service in general, the effect had been immediate and profound. As Eleanor signed the account documents, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions: gratitude for the improved service, lingering frustration at how she had been treated earlier, and a warm pride at seeing her former students' apparent success and influence. There was something poetic about the situation. A teacher who had once helped a struggling student now potentially benefiting from that same student's rise to prominence, though he remained unaware of her presence. That should do it, Patricia said as Eleanor signed the last form. Your new account is all set up. The maintenance fees have been refunded to your account, and they should show up in your balance immediately. Thank you for your help, Eleanor said, gathering her things. This is a much better solution than what I was offered this morning. It's our pleasure, Patricia replied, her smile genuine. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? Eleanor hesitated, looking again toward Robert Thompson, who was now shaking hands with several bank employees near the entrance. No, I believe that's everything. Patricia walked her to the door of the office. Please don't hesitate to contact me directly if you have any questions or concerns in the future. Here's my card with my direct number. Eleanor accepted the card, tucking it carefully into her handbag. As they emerged from the office, she saw that Robert was preparing to leave, checking his watch and moving toward the exit with the bank manager still at his side. A sudden impulse seized Eleanor, a desire to know if he would remember her, to reconnect with this piece of her teaching past. But as she took a step in his direction, she hesitated. He was clearly an important man with many demands on his time. Would he even remember a mathematics teacher from decades ago? Would he care? Perhaps it was better to leave the past in the past, to be grateful for the indirect benefit his presence had brought her today without imposing on him personally. While Eleanor stood hesitating, Robert paused near the entrance, saying something to the manager that made him hurry away toward the back offices. Robert remained by the door, glancing at his phone and seemingly waiting for the manager to return. He was standing directly in Eleanor's path to the exit. Thank you again for your help, Eleanor said to Patricia, making her decision. She would simply walk past Robert on her way out, without intruding on his day. If he recognized her, so be. If not, she would continue on her way with her dignity intact. Patricia nodded and returned to her office as Eleanor made her way slowly across the bank floor, leaning on her cane. As she approached the entrance where Robert stood, she kept her eyes forward, prepared to pass by with just a polite nod if their eyes happened to meet. What she didn't expect was the bank manager rushing back across the floor at that exact moment, calling out to Robert while waving a folder. Mr. Thompson, I have those figures you requested. The manager moved so quickly that he nearly collided with Eleanor, causing her to lose her balance. Her cane slipped on the polished floor, and she stumbled forward, dropping her handbag as she reached out instinctively to catch herself. Before she could fall, a strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her with a gentle but firm grip. "Careful there," said a deep, pleasant voice. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Eleanor looked up into the concerned face of Robert Thompson, who had moved quickly to prevent her fall. His dark eyes showed genuine concern as he helped her regain her balance. "Thank you," she said, her heart racing from the near fall. "I'm fine, just a bit unsteady on these slippery floors." The bank manager looked horrified. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going. Please forgive me." Robert kept his hand supportively on Eleanor's elbow as he bent to retrieve her handbag, handing it to her with a respectful nod. As he straightened and their eyes met properly for the first time, something flickered across his face, a moment of confusion, then dawning recognition. "Excuse me," he said, studying her face more carefully. "This may sound strange, but you look very familiar. Have we met before?" Eleanor smiled, her earlier hesitation forgotten. "It was a long time ago, Mr. Thompson. You probably wouldn't remember. I was your mathematics teacher at Washington High School back in the 1980s. Mrs. Eleanor Washington." Robert's expression transformed into one of astonishment and delight. "Mrs. Washington? Is it really you? I don't believe it." His formal demeanor fell away, replaced by genuine warmth. "You haven't changed a bit, still the same kind eyes I remember." The bank manager looked between them in confusion. "You two know each other?" "Know each other," Robert said, his hand still supportively at Eleanor's elbow. "This woman changed my life. Mrs. Washington was the best teacher I ever had, the one who convinced me I could go to college when no one else thought I had a chance." Eleanor felt a warm glow of pleasure at his words and the sincere way he delivered them. "You were an exceptional student, Robert. All I did was point out what was already there." "Hardly," Robert replied with a shake of his head. "You stayed after school to tutor me for months. You helped me fill out scholarship applications. You even drove me to my college interview when my mother's car broke down." He turned to the bank manager. "Did you know Mrs. Washington used to grade papers during her lunch break so she could be available for students after school? She never turned anyone away who needed help?" The manager looked at Eleanor with new interest and respect. "I had no idea." "There's a lot you don't know about Mrs. Washington," Robert continued, a hint of steel entering his voice. "Including, apparently, how she was treated in your bank today." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew about that?" Robert nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "I was in the coffee shop across the street earlier. I overheard two of your employees discussing a difficult old lady who couldn't understand basic banking. Their description was rather unflattering, but something about it caught my attention. When one of them mentioned the name Washington, I wondered if it might be you." He turned to the manager, whose face had paled considerably. "That's partly why I decided to drop in unexpectedly this afternoon. I wanted to see firsthand how this branch was treating its customers, particularly elderly ones who have been loyal for decades." The manager swallowed hard. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you that customer service is our highest priority." "Is it?" Robert interrupted. "Because from what I observed and what my staff has uncovered in the past hour, there seems to be a pattern of dismissive treatment toward certain demographics, particularly older clients and those with modest accounts." Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions: embarrassment at being the center of attention, vindication that her poor treatment had been noticed, and a teacher's pride in seeing her former student stand up for what was right. "Robert," she said gently, "please don't make a fuss on my account. Everything has been resolved now." He smiled at her, the same smile she remembered from when he had successfully solved a difficult equation. "It's not just for you, Mrs. Washington, though I'd move mountains to ensure you were treated with the respect you deserve. It's about making sure everyone who walks through these doors is valued, regardless of their account balance or age." Eleanor nodded, understanding, This was why she had become a teacher, to help shape young people who would go on to make a difference in the world. Robert Thompson had clearly become such a person. The bank lobby had grown quiet. Other customers and staff had noticed the interaction between Eleanor, Robert, and the increasingly uncomfortable bank manager. The usual bustle of transactions and conversations had dimmed as people strained to overhear what was happening near the entrance. "Mrs. Washington," Robert said warmly, "I was about to head to lunch. Would you do me the honor of joining me? I'd love to catch up after all these years." Eleanor hesitated, glancing at her watch. "That's very kind of you, Robert, but I should catch my bus. It's due in 15 minutes. "Please, I insist," Robert said. "My driver can take you home afterward, so you don't need to worry about the bus." He smiled, a touch of the eager student still visible in the successful businessman. "It's not every day I get to thank the teacher who changed my life." Put that way, Eleanor found it hard to refuse. Besides, she was curious to learn more about Robert's journey since high school. "Well, when you put it that way, I'd be delighted." Robert turned to the bank manager, his expression cooling noticeably. "I'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. to continue our discussion about customer service improvements. Please have those reports ready, along with personnel files for all frontline staff." "Of course, Mr. Thompson," the manager replied, his forehead shining with nervous perspiration. "I'll have everything prepared." Robert offered his arm to Eleanor. "Shall we?" Eleanor placed her hand lightly on his arm, aware of the many eyes watching them. As they walked slowly toward the exit, she caught sight of Brandon behind his teller window, his face a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Diane, the unhelpful personal banker from earlier, was staring open-mouthed at the unexpected turn of events. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, but the heat had lessened slightly. A sleek black car idled at the curb, its driver stepping out, promptly to open the rear door as they approached. "After you, Mrs. Washington," Robert said, helping her into the vehicle's cool interior. The car was luxurious without being ostentatious. Soft leather seats, plenty of legroom, and blissfully effective air conditioning. Eleanor settled in, placing her handbag and cane carefully beside her. Robert joined her, closing the door, and immediately creating a peaceful cocoon separated from the noisy street outside. "The Winston, please, David," he instructed the driver. "We'll be having lunch." "Yes, sir," the driver replied, pulling smoothly away from the curb. "The Winston is just a few blocks away," Robert explained to Eleanor. "It's quiet and the food is excellent. I hope that suits you." "That sounds lovely," Eleanor said, though privately she wondered if she was dressed appropriately for what was surely an upscale establishment. Her Sunday best dress had seemed fine for a trip to the bank, but perhaps not for a fancy restaurant. As if reading her thoughts, Robert added, "They know me there. We'll have a private dining room where we can talk comfortably." The car moved efficiently through downtown traffic, stopping minutes later before an elegant stone building. The driver came around to open Eleanor's door, offering his hand to help her out. Robert exited on the other side, then came around to escort her into the restaurant. Inside, they were greeted immediately by a host who clearly recognized Robert. "Mr. Thompson, welcome back. Your usual room is ready." "Thank you, James. This is Mrs. Eleanor Washington, my special guest today." The host bowed slightly to Eleanor. "It's a pleasure to welcome you, Mrs. Washington. Please follow me." They were led through the main dining area, all dark wood, crisp white tablecloths and murmuring conversations, to a small private room at the back. A table was already set for two, with a window overlooking a surprisingly lush garden courtyard. Robert held Eleanor's chair for her, then took his seat opposite. "I hope this is comfortable for you." "It's lovely," Eleanor said, genuinely impressed. "I've passed this restaurant many times but never been inside." "The owner is a friend," Robert explained as a waiter appeared silently to pour water into crystal glasses. "Would you like something else to drink? Tea, perhaps, or a glass of wine?" "Just water is fine for now, thank you," Eleanor said. She placed her napkin carefully in her lap, feeling slightly out of her element but determined not to show it. Once they were alone again, Robert leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Mrs. Washington, I can't tell you how amazing it is to see you again. You look exactly as I remember. Same dignified posture, same kind eyes. Eleanor laughed softly. That's very gallant of you, Robert. But we both know I've aged quite a bit since you were in my classroom. Hardly, he insisted with a warm smile. You always carried yourself with such grace. That hasn't changed a bit. His expression became more serious. I'm truly sorry about what happened at the bank today. That kind of treatment is inexcusable. It's, unfortunately, not uncommon, Eleanor admitted. As you get older, you become somewhat invisible to certain people. Add being a woman of color and, well, she shrugged slightly. But please, let's not dwell on unpleasantness. Tell me about yourself. What has your life been like since high school? The waiter returned with menus, but Robert waved them away. Would you trust me to order for us? The chef always prepares something special when I visit. Of course, Eleanor agreed, relieved not to navigate an unfamiliar menu that likely didn't include prices. After the waiter departed with Robert's quiet instructions, he turned back to Eleanor. After high school, I went to State University on that scholarship you helped me get. I studied business and economics, worked part-time to send money home to my mother and siblings. I remember how dedicated you were to your family, Eleanor said. You worked at the grocery store after school, didn't you? Robert's eyes widened in surprise. You remember that? After all the students you must have taught? Some students stay with you, Eleanor said simply. You were one of them. Robert seemed genuinely touched. After college, I got an entry-level position at a commercial real estate firm. The hours were long, but I learned everything I could. Eventually, I saved enough to make a small investment in a property downtown, an old warehouse that nobody wanted. And from there, Eleanor prompted. From there, a lot of hard work and some good fortune. That first building turned a profit when we converted it to loft apartments. I reinvested, bought more properties, expanded into development, and eventually, other businesses. He smiled somewhat self-consciously. I've been fortunate. It wasn't just fortune, Eleanor said firmly. It was intelligence, hard work, and character. Those were always your strengths, even as a teenager. Their conversation paused as the waiter returned with the first course, a delicate soup for Eleanor and a small salad for Robert. Please enjoy while it's hot, Robert encouraged. Eleanor took a spoonful of the soup, which was delicious, subtle flavors that she couldn't quite identify but thoroughly enjoyed. This is wonderful, she said appreciatively. I'm glad you like it. The chef here is remarkably talented. Robert tried his salad, then continued. What about you, Mrs. Washington? Did you continue teaching until retirement? Eleanor nodded. 35 years at Washington High. I finally retired at 65, though I missed it terribly at first. I can imagine. You seemed born to teach. Robert's expression grew thoughtful. You know, I've often wondered why you took such an interest in me. There were plenty of other students who needed help. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. There was something in you, a spark, a determination despite the obstacles in your way. When you spoke about your dreams for the future, you didn't just wish for them. You were already planning how to achieve them. She smiled at the memory. Some students want to be helped, but you wanted to learn how to help yourself. That's a crucial difference. You saw something in me that I couldn't yet see in myself, Robert said quietly. Do you know I still have that note you wrote on my calculus final? The one where you said, your mind is your greatest asset. Use it to build the future you deserve. Eleanor was touched that he had kept something so small for so many years. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it mattered so much. Robert set down his fork. After my mother died, I found out she had kept every report card, every note you sent home about my progress. She couldn't always come to parent-teacher conferences because of her work schedule, but she told me you called her regularly with updates. She was doing her best under difficult circumstances, Eleanor said. Working 2 jobs, raising 3 children alone. I admired her tremendously. Their empty first-course plates were whisked away, replaced by entrees. Roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables for Eleanor, grilled fish for Robert. This looks marvelous, Eleanor said. Please eat while it's hot, Robert encouraged again. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Eleanor asked, What about your personal life? Did you marry? Have children? Robert's expression softened. I did. My wife, Denise, and I have been married for 25 years. We have 3 children. Our oldest son is finishing medical school, our daughter is studying law, and our youngest is still in high school. How wonderful, Eleanor said sincerely. You must be very proud. I am, Robert agreed, though I can't take much credit. Denise has been the heart of our family. She keeps us all grounded, reminds us of what truly matters. He smiled. She was a teacher too before she decided to focus on raising our children. She'd like you very much. And you? Robert asked. You mentioned your husband has passed. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, Eleanor said, feeling the familiar ache at the mention of Harold. We had 52 years together. He was a history teacher. We met at a faculty meeting my first year at Washington High. 52 years, Robert repeated softly. That's remarkable. We were blessed, Eleanor agreed. 2 children, 4 grandchildren now. My daughter lives in Atlanta with her family, and my son is in Chicago. They visit when they can, call often, but... She sighed lightly. Distance makes regular visits difficult. It must be challenging being on your own after so many years together, Robert observed. Robert nodded. A lesson I'll remember. He hesitated, then added, May I hug you, Mrs. Washington? It seems inadequate to just shake hands after everything you've meant to my life. Eleanor opened her arms in response, and Robert embraced her gently. It was a moment of genuine connection between teacher and student, now both adults with full lives behind and still before them. As they separated, Robert said, I'll have someone from the foundation contact you tomorrow with details about the position. No pressure, but I do hope you'll consider it. I will, Eleanor promised. Truly. Robert waited as she unlocked her door, then said his goodbyes with a promise to be in touch soon. Eleanor watched from her window as the black car pulled away from the curb, carrying her former student back to his world of business meetings and corporate decisions. Inside her apartment, Eleanor set her handbag down on the small table by the door next to the framed photo of Harold. You won't believe the day I've had, she said to the image of her late husband. His kind eyes seemed to twinkle back at her, as if he had witnessed the entire remarkable turn of events. Eleanor made her way to her favorite chair by the window, feeling tired but fulfilled in a way she hadn't experienced in quite some time. The bank statements and account disclosures that had seemed so overwhelming that morning now sat forgotten in her handbag. Instead, her mind was filled with possibilities, of meaningful work ahead, of connections renewed, of the unexpected, ways life could surprise you even at 78. She thought of what Robert had said about nothing being wasted, about using influence for positive change. Perhaps this scholarship committee position would allow her to continue what she had always tried to do as a teacher, recognize potential in young people and help them access opportunities to fulfill it. As the afternoon light slanted through her window, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose warming her like the golden rays. She had entered the bank that morning feeling diminished and overlooked. She would end the day feeling valued and seen, not just by Robert Thompson, but by herself. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through Eleanor's bedroom curtains earlier than usual. She had slept better than she had. In months, the weight of financial worries temporarily lifted from her shoulders. As she went through her morning routine, stretching exercises to ease her arthritis, a light breakfast of toast and tea, a few minutes with her devotional book, Eleanor's mind kept returning to the events of the previous day and the unexpected offer from Robert Thompson. The business card he had given her sat on her kitchen table where she had placed it the night before. Eleanor picked it up, running her finger over the embossed lettering. Thompson Enterprises. Such a long way from the earnest boy who had struggled with polynomial equations but never gave up. The thought brought a smile to her face. After breakfast, Eleanor settled in her favorite chair with a notepad, making a list of pros and cons about the scholarship committee position. On the pro side, meaningful work, using her experience to help deserving students, a modest income supplement, and regular interaction with young people, which she had always enjoyed. On the con side, her age and occasional health issues, transportation challenges since she no longer drove, and the emotional investment that came with making decisions that would affect young people's futures. Eleanor tapped her pen against the notepad, weighing these factors. The pros clearly outweighed the cons, yet she hesitated. Since Harold's passing, she had grown cautious about new commitments, protective of her independence and routine. Change felt more daunting now than it had in her younger years. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Eleanor set aside her notepad and reached for the receiver. "Hello? Mrs. Washington, this is Patricia Hughes from First National Bank." Eleanor straightened in her chair, surprised to hear from the personal banker, who had helped her yesterday. "Yes, good morning. I hope I'm not calling too early," Patricia continued. "I wanted to follow up on our meeting yesterday and make sure everything was satisfactory." "That's very thoughtful," Eleanor replied, noting the significant improvement in customer service since Robert's appearance. "Yes, everything seems to be in order." "Excellent. I've reviewed your new account setup and I wanted to let you know that those maintenance fees we refunded have been processed. They should be reflected in your balance now." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I appreciate you checking." There was a slight pause before Patricia continued, her tone warming. "Mrs. Washington, I also wanted to apologize personally for your experience yesterday morning. It wasn't representative of how we aim to treat our customers, particularly long-standing ones like yourself." The apology seemed genuine, making Eleanor wonder if it was prompted by corporate directive or personal reflection. Perhaps both. "I accept your apology, Ms. Hughes. We all have our off days." "That's generous of you," Patricia replied. "We're implementing some changes at the branch to ensure better service for all customers. In fact, Mr. Thompson is meeting with our management team as we speak." Eleanor smiled to herself. Robert was certainly a man of his word. "I'm glad to hear that." "Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Patricia asked. "Not at the moment, thank you. But it's good to know I have someone to contact if needed." After ending the call, Eleanor sat for a moment reflecting on the ripples already spreading from yesterday's events. Something as simple as being treated with dignity and respect at a bank shouldn't feel like a victory, yet somehow it did. Not just for her, but potentially for others who might have faced similar treatment. The telephone rang again. This time it was her daughter Catherine calling from Atlanta for their weekly check-in. "Mom, you sound different today," Catherine observed after they had exchanged greetings. "Did something happen?" Eleanor found herself recounting the previous day's events, the frustration at the bank, the serendipitous appearance of her former student, the lunch invitation, and the job offer. Catherine listened with increasing amazement. "Wait, Robert Thompson? The real estate developer? He was your student?" "Yes, though he was just Robert back then, of course. A bright boy from the East Side with a gift for mathematics." "And he's offered you a position on his scholarship committee?" Catherine sounded impressed. "Mom, that's a big deal. Thompson Foundation scholarships are substantial. I read about them in a magazine article." "I didn't realize they were so well known," Eleanor admitted. "They are in education circles. They cover full tuition plus expenses for 4 years." Catherine paused. "So, are you going to accept?" "I'm still considering it," Eleanor said, though she could hear the hesitation in her own voice fading. Her daughter's enthusiasm was contagious. "Mom, this is perfect for you. You've always been able to spot potential in students that others missed. Remember how you fought for Anthony Williams when the principal wanted to expel him? He became a doctor because you wouldn't give up on him." Eleanor smiled at the memory. Anthony had been a troubled student, acting out due to problems at home. She had seen past the behavior to the bright, hurting child beneath. "I remember. And now you could help identify students who deserve that same chance." Catherine's voice softened. "Dad would be so proud, Mom. You know he always said you were the best judge of character he'd ever known. The mention of Harold brought both warmth and a familiar ache. He did say that, didn't he? All the time, Catherine confirmed. So what's holding you back? Eleanor sighed, finally admitting the truth to herself as much as to her daughter. I suppose I'm afraid of failing. At my age, taking on something new feels risky. Mom, Catherine said gently, in all your years of teaching, you told countless students not to let fear stop them from pursuing opportunities. Maybe it's time to take your own advice. The word struck home. How many times had Eleanor encouraged her students to step outside their comfort zones, to embrace challenges as opportunities for growth? How could she now shy away from doing the same? You're right, Eleanor admitted. Your father would say I'm being stubborn again. Catherine laughed. He certainly would. So you'll call Mr. Thompson? Yes, I think I will. After finishing the call with Catherine, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. She picked up Robert's business card and her telephone, dialing the number with careful precision. A receptionist answered promptly. Thompson Enterprises, how may I direct your call? Robert Thompson, please. This is Eleanor Washington calling. One moment, Mrs. Washington. Eleanor was surprised she hadn't been asked to explain her business or connection. Perhaps Robert had left instructions regarding her call. After a brief hold, Robert's warm voice came on the line. Mrs. Washington, I'm so glad you called. How are you today? Very well, thank you. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Nothing that can't wait, Robert assured her. I've just finished meeting with the bank management, actually. I think you'll be pleased with the changes they'll be implementing. Patricia Hughes called me this morning, Eleanor said. She seemed quite earnest about improving their service. They've had a collective awakening, Robert replied, a hint of dry humor in his tone. Amazing what the possibility of losing a major client can do for customer service philosophy. Eleanor chuckled. Indeed. Eleanor nodded. It is. There are practical matters like today's banking issues that Harold always handled. But mostly it's the silence. After decades of sharing your life with someone, their absence is palpable. I can only imagine, Robert said with genuine empathy. Do you have support nearby? Friends, community? Oh yes, Eleanor assured him. My church family is wonderful. I volunteer at the community garden teaching children about plants, and I have neighbors who check in regularly. I'm not alone, just adjusting to a different life. Their conversation flowed easily as they finished their meal, sharing memories of Washington High School, updates on other teachers Robert remembered, and stories of their respective families. Dessert arrived, a light fruit tart that Eleanor found perfect after the substantial main course. You mentioned earlier that you returned to the bank partly because of overhearing a conversation about me, Eleanor said, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. Was that truly the only reason? Robert set down his coffee cup. Not entirely. My company has significant investments with First National. Over the past year, I've heard concerning reports about their customer service, particularly toward elderly clients and those with modest accounts. I've been planning an unannounced visit for some time. And hearing about my experience was the final straw? Eleanor guessed. Let's say it accelerated my timeline, Robert confirmed. When I heard those tellers laughing about an elderly black woman who couldn't understand basic banking, something just clicked. I thought about my mother, how she might have been treated in her later years. And then when they mentioned the name Washington, he shook his head. I couldn't ignore that. Well, your timing was certainly fortunate for me, Eleanor said. Actually, I think the bank is the fortunate one, Robert replied. This gives them a chance to address these issues before they lose valuable customers and possibly face more serious consequences. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. What kind of consequences? My company is considering a significant new investment. First National is one of several banks being considered to handle the financing. Robert's expression became more serious. After today, they'll need to make substantial changes to remain in consideration. I see, Eleanor said, understanding the implicit power in his statement. And will the changes you're requesting help other people like me? That's the goal, Robert assured her. Better training for staff, priority service for long-term customers regardless of account balance, more accessibility features for elderly or disabled clients. He smiled slightly. And accountability for those who fail to treat every customer with respect. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. She appreciated that Robert wasn't simply fixing her individual problem, but addressing the systemic issues that had caused it. You know, she said after a moment, I've always believed that education is about more than just information. It's about teaching values, how to treat others, how to use knowledge responsibly. You certainly taught me that, Robert agreed. More by example than by lecture. I'm glad to see it took root, Eleanor said with genuine pride. Using your influence to help others. That's what true success looks like. Robert looked momentarily humbled by her praise. I try to remember where I came from, who helped me along the way. My mother, who worked herself to exhaustion to give us opportunities. Teachers like you who believed in me before I fully believed in myself. The waiter appeared to clear their dessert plates and refill their coffee cups. Mrs. Washington, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, Robert said once they were alone again. A proposal, if you're willing to hear it. Of course, Eleanor said, curious. I serve on several community boards, including the Education Foundation that provides scholarships to students at Washington High. We've been looking for someone with deep knowledge of the school to help identify promising students who might otherwise be overlooked. Students with potential but perhaps not the highest GPAs or most obvious achievements. Eleanor immediately understood what he was suggesting. You want me to help select scholarship recipients? More than that, Robert said. I'd like you to chair the selection committee. It would involve reviewing applications, conducting interviews, and making recommendations. It's a paid position, though not full-time, perhaps 10 hours a week during application season, less during other times of the year. Oh, Eleanor said, genuinely surprised by the offer. That's unexpected. You spent decades identifying potential in young people, nurturing it, helping it grow, Robert pointed out. That's exactly the skill we need. And it would be meaningful work with tangible impact. The proposal was tempting. Since retirement, Eleanor had missed the sense of purpose that teaching had given her. The community garden was fulfilling, but this would be a return to her true passion, helping young people access education. I'd need to think about it, she said carefully. At my age, taking on new commitments requires consideration. Of course, Robert said immediately. There's no rush. The position wouldn't begin until next month when we start planning for the upcoming scholarship cycle. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, thinking about the unexpected turn her day had taken. She had left home this morning worried about bank fees and feeling increasingly marginalized in a changing world. Now she was being offered a meaningful role that valued her experience and expertise. I have to ask, she said finally, whether this offer is related to what happened at the bank today. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of that unfortunate incident. Robert shook his head firmly. This position has been open for several weeks. We've been discussing potential candidates, and your name was already on my list. Seeing you today just confirmed what I already knew, that you're exactly the right person for this role. His sincerity was evident, and Eleanor felt herself warming to the idea. In that case, I'd be honored to consider it. Perhaps you could send me the details? Absolutely. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, sliding it across the table. My direct number is on there. Call anytime with questions or when you've made your decision. Eleanor accepted the card, noticing the embossed logo of Thompson Enterprises and Robert's title, CEO and founder. She tucked it carefully into her handbag. Thank you for lunch, she said. It was delicious and the company was even better. The pleasure was entirely mine, Robert replied warmly. Reconnecting with you has been the highlight of my week. Whether or not you accept the position, I hope we can stay in touch. I'd like that, Eleanor said genuinely. Robert glanced at his watch. I hate to end this, but I have a meeting across town in 30 minutes. May I have David drive you home? That would be very kind, thank you. Robert signaled the waiter who appeared with the check. After signing it without examining the amount, Robert stood and helped Eleanor from her chair. Shall we? Outside, the black car was waiting at the curb. The driver, David, held the door as Eleanor carefully lowered herself into the back seat, Robert following after giving David her address. As the car pulled smoothly into traffic, Eleanor looked out at the city streets, the same streets she had traveled earlier that day. Yet somehow they looked different now. Perhaps it was the comfort of the luxury vehicle, or perhaps it was the renewed sense of value and purpose that her unexpected reunion had given her. I want to thank you again for your intervention at the bank, Eleanor said after they had traveled a few blocks in comfortable silence. Not just for me, but for taking the broader issues seriously. It's the least I could do, Robert replied. I've been fortunate in business, but with success comes responsibility. Using influence to create positive change. That's something you taught me, even if you didn't phrase it that way back then. I'm not sure I can take credit for that, Eleanor demurred. Please do, Robert insisted. You showed us that knowledge, brought responsibility, that learning wasn't just for our own advancement but gave us tools to improve the world around us. The car turned onto Eleanor's street, slowing as it approached her modest apartment building. It looked somewhat shabby next to the gleaming vehicle, but Eleanor felt no embarrassment. This had been home for 15 years, filled with memories of her life with Harold and visits from their children and grandchildren. Here we are, Robert said as the car stopped. May I walk you to your door? That's not necessary, Eleanor began, but Robert was already instructing David to wait as he came around to open her door. I insist, he said, offering his arm as she carefully exited the vehicle. The short walk to her building entrance gave Eleanor a moment to appreciate the full circle of this remarkable day. From the frustration and humiliation at the bank to this moment, being escorted home by a former student who had risen to prominence while still honoring the values she had tried to instill. At her door, Eleanor turned to face Robert. This has been quite a day, she said with a small smile. It certainly has, Robert agreed. Finding you again after all these years, it feels like more than coincidence. Perhaps it is, Eleanor said thoughtfully. I've always believed that nothing is wasted, not even difficult experiences. Sometimes they lead us exactly where we need to be. But I suspect you didn't call to discuss the bank, Robert continued. Have you had a chance to consider the committee position? I have, Eleanor confirmed. I'd like to accept if the offer still stands. That's wonderful news, Robert said, genuine pleasure evident in his voice. The foundation will be lucky to have your expertise. I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork today, and perhaps we could meet next week to discuss the specifics. That would be fine, Eleanor agreed. And Robert, thank you for thinking of me. Thank you for accepting, he countered. This isn't charity, Mrs. Washington. We need someone with your insight and experience. The fact that I get to repay a small portion of what I owe you is just a bonus. After arranging details for their next meeting, Eleanor hung up the phone feeling lighter than she had in months. The prospect of meaningful work, of continuing to influence young lives even in retirement, filled her with quiet joy. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered an envelope containing information about the Thompson Foundation Scholarship Program, along with preliminary paperwork for her position. Eleanor spent hours reading through the materials, impressed by the Foundation's comprehensive approach. Beyond financial support, scholars received mentoring, internship opportunities, and networking connections. It was exactly the kind of holistic program she would have designed herself. The following week passed in a pleasant blur of activity. Eleanor met with Robert at the Foundation offices, where she was introduced to the staff and given a proper orientation. She was assigned an assistant, a bright young woman named Lisa, who seemed genuinely excited to work with her. Eleanor's office, while small, had a window overlooking a park and shelves that she could fill with her own books and mementos. Is everything to your satisfaction? Robert asked as he concluded the tour. More than I expected, Eleanor admitted. I wasn't sure how much I could contribute at my age, but everyone has been so welcoming. They recognize the value of your experience, Robert said. And so do I. 2 weeks after starting her new position, Eleanor returned to First National Bank to withdraw money for her monthly expenses. The difference in atmosphere was immediately apparent. The lobby had been rearranged to include a comfortable seating area, with chairs suitable for elderly or disabled customers. A large print directory clearly indicated where to go for different services. Most noticeably, there was a new desk near the entrance staffed by a friendly young man whose name tag read, Customer Care Representative. Good morning, he greeted Eleanor warmly. How may I assist you today? I need to make a withdrawal, Eleanor explained. I'd be happy to help with that. May I ask if you're a long-term customer? We have priority service for clients who have been with us for over 20 years. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised. Yes, over 40 years, actually. Wonderful. In that case, please follow me. He led her to a special window where a familiar face waited. Good morning, Mrs. Washington, Brandon said, his manner markedly different from their previous encounter. Welcome back to First National. How may I help you today? Eleanor studied him for a moment, noting his improved demeanor. There was no sign of the impatience or condescension that had characterized their interaction before. I'd like to withdraw $200, please, she said, presenting her identification and account information. Of course. Brandon processed her transaction efficiently but without rushing, explaining each step clearly without being patronizing. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? No, thank you. This is all I needed. As Brandon counted out her cash, he hesitated, then said quietly, Mrs. Washington, I owe you an apology for how I treated you during your last visit. It was unprofessional and disrespectful. I'm truly sorry. The apology caught Eleanor by surprise. She hadn't expected such personal accountability. Thank you, Brandon, I appreciate that. We've all been through additional training, he explained. But more importantly, I've done some reflecting on my own attitudes. I was wrong to make assumptions based on age or appearance. Eleanor nodded, accepting both the apology and the cash he handed her. We all have room to grow, Brandon. The important thing is recognizing when change is needed. As she turned to leave, Eleanor noticed a framed certificate on the wall that hadn't been there before. First National Bank Community Commitment. We pledge to serve all customers with dignity, respect, and excellence, regardless of age, race, gender, or account balance. Outside, the early autumn sunshine felt particularly warm on her face. Eleanor walked with a lighter step than she had in months, her cane barely touching the ground between strides. The changes at the bank were a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but they represented something important, the power of standing up for dignity and respect, and the ripple effects that one person's actions could create. As she waited, at the bus stop, Eleanor watched people hurrying past, young professionals glued to their phones, mothers with small children, elderly couples walking arm in arm, each with their own stories, their own challenges and triumphs. In her new role at the foundation, she would have the opportunity to shape some of those stories, to help open doors that might otherwise remain closed. The bus arrived, and the driver greeted her by name, a small-town courtesy that Eleanor had always appreciated about her neighborhood route. She found a seat near the front, setting her handbag carefully in her lap. Good day at the bank? The driver asked as they pulled away from the curb. Yes, Eleanor replied with a smile. A very good day indeed. Later that evening, Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table addressing envelopes for the scholarship committee's first meeting invitations. The work was pleasant, giving her hands something to do while her mind wandered. She thought about the unlikely series of events that had led her to this point, how a difficult experience had transformed into an unexpected opportunity, how a connection from decades past had resurfaced at precisely the right moment. As she sealed the last envelope, Eleanor's gaze fell on Harold's photo on the sideboard. You always said everything happens for a reason, she told his smiling image. I think I'm beginning to see the truth in that again. The telephone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Robert. Mrs. Washington, I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, she assured him. I was just finishing up some committee work. That's actually why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that we've received an anonymous donation to the scholarship fund, a substantial one, specifically designated for students interested in mathematics education. That's wonderful, Eleanor said. Mathematics teachers are always in demand. The donor requested that we name this particular scholarship after an educator who made a significant difference in their life. Robert continued. They suggested the Eleanor Washington Future Educators Scholarship. Eleanor's hand flew to her heart, which had suddenly accelerated. Robert, you didn't. I hope you don't mind, he said, a smile evident in his voice. It seemed fitting to honor the teacher who changed my life by helping create more educators like her. Eleanor found herself momentarily speechless, tears welling in her eyes. After a lifetime of teaching, of pouring herself into thousands of students without expectation of recognition or reward, this acknowledgement touched her deeply. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. Say you'll help us find worthy recipients, Robert replied. Students with that same spark you saw in me all those years ago. I would be honored, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her emotion. After ending the call, Eleanor sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the full circle of events. From feeling invisible and dismissed to having her life's work recognized in such a meaningful way, the contrast was profound. She thought of all the students who would benefit from these scholarships in years to come, young people she would help identify and support. Some would become teachers themselves, continuing the legacy in classrooms of their own. Others would follow different paths but carry with them the values she had always tried to instill: dignity, respect, perseverance, and compassion. Eleanor rose and moved to her window, looking out at the quiet street below. Streetlights created pools of golden light in the gathering dusk, illuminating the path forward one step at a time. At 78, she had discovered that life still held possibilities, that her voice still mattered, that her experience and wisdom were still valued. The journey wasn't over. It had simply taken an unexpected turn. And for the first time since Harold's passing, Eleanor found herself looking forward to tomorrow with genuine anticipation, curious to see where this new path might lead. The bank incident that had begun as a humiliation had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that standing tall in the face of disrespect could lead to positive change, not just for oneself, but for others who might face similar treatment. And a lesson that connections made with sincerity and care, even decades in the past, could resurface when most needed, bringing unexpected blessings. Eleanor smiled as she turned from the window. Tomorrow would bring the first official meeting of the scholarship committee. She had preparations to complete, ideas to organize, and a new chapter to begin. Life still has its surprises, Harold, she whispered to the quiet apartment. And I'm finally ready for them again.